the media class, I call them all the political class, really, because they're all from the same kind of background. They're all, reasonably well-off people who don't really know anything about, mixing with ordinary people or doing ordinary jobs. They've never done it. They've been through, some nice private school. If it wasn't a private school, it was a pretty, well-funded independent school of some kind. Then they went to university, then they got a job, and, they live in nice parts of London. They have no clue what it's like in this country.
No, they don't. No, I completely agree with you.
When we did a radio tour a few years ago, we went to Sunderland, and it didn't surprise me in the least when Sunderland came up for a leave the EU, because some parts of the country have been absolutely forgotten.
Yeah.
And I agree with you with regards to this COVID-19 thing. There's a fundamental disconnect between the way most of the people in this country live and what Westminster thinks is happening. That disconnect.
And all the people, and I think all the people who have bought the message that, it's very dangerous, you must continue to wear a mask. I mean, I said yesterday to Chris Philp, who's the Justice Minister, why do you wear a mask on the tube when it's no longer required? And he went, it's the right thing to do. And I went, why? He couldn't answer. Didn't know.
Of course it didn't. It's just virtual signalling claptrap.
I saw a guy today driving a Range Rover on his own with a mask on and gloves.
Were they driving gloves?
Driving gloves.
One of those. So, guys, listen, what can we do? I mean, I'm basically just going to keep sitting here. People say, all you do is talk. Well, that's what I'm good at.
So here we are. This is July 2021. Extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, this boat hasn't even got an engine. It's probably been stolen. They haven't paid traffickers. They're coming on their own. Often we see people that can't afford the fare, can't afford the fee, and this is how they're now travelling. They've got a lovely day. If the weather was to puff up, that'd be the end of that lot. And that's what's going on every day on the channel. I will be talking about this tonight at 7 o'clock on GB News.
Well, very few politicians are scientists, but we can read, we can take advice, we can talk to a lot of people, and there are also some things which are just fundamental points of principle. And I've said throughout the pandemic, of course, it's a serious disease, it's something we ought to take seriously, people ought to be prepared to take precautions. But we also need to recognise there are some things that governments simply shouldn't be allowed to do to people. And I think the lockdowns where people were banned by law from seeing their children or grandchildren, for instance, is something that simply isn't acceptable. The idea that government can ban people from starting a new relationship, I don't think that's acceptable.
Unless they're a minister, of course.
Well, so I think we need to, first of all, to recognise what those things are that government simply shouldn't interfere in. And then beyond that, I think we need to have some very clear ideas about where we're heading with the pandemic response. When does it end? How many times can you lock down? How many times can you reintroduce rules that have been lifted?
So why on earth are sage advisors suggesting we lose our freedoms once more? Predictably, it's because they warn the NHS could become overwhelmed by the end of August. Really? The middle of summer? Don't think so. So what do they want? Well, mandatory face masks and permanent working from home, of course. And sadly, that's what this is really about. Sage want us to live a different life, one where risk is not down to the individual, but is controlled by the state. I'm sick of it. I'm fed up of the scare tactics, and I'm furious that Sage and many in government seem to believe our freedoms are theirs to take away. The only hope I have is that with the megalomaniac, Dominic Cummings, now well out of the picture, Boris has the strength to claim back control from the scientists.
Now, you've alluded to this earlier on, but you had a very uncomfortable time towards the end of your tenure as Transport Secretary. Sort of virtually every day or every week there were headlines sort of failing, grailing. I mean, how did that affect you personally?
It's incredibly annoying, particularly when it's often based on stuff that's nonsense. So the one that people would quote is, Chris Grayling gave a contract to a ferry company with no ferries. Well, yes and no is the answer to that.
Well, either it did or it didn't.
So we gave a contract to, we had 3 bids for a contract, one of which was from a startup company. So we gave it a contract that said, basically, we're not going to commit to paying you any money unless you deliver the service. And so fine, if you can get your service up and running and we'll buy some tickets on it, that's fine. But if you don't, we won't pay any money. We never paid them any money at all. They were actually backed by a credible Irish company. They were looking to buy 2 ships from one of their potential competitors through a third party, which meant that we couldn't talk too much about what the business model was. But a journalist decided this was the most exciting story that they'd ever discovered, the ferry company with no ferries. And as you said earlier, the pack tends to pile in. But, you know, no matter how often you said, we're not spending any money on this unless we get the service that we are asking for, they'd still say, oh, we gave the contract to a ferry company with no ferries. Now, the truth is, if you get a plane next week, you're probably on a plane that's owned by a leasing company, not by the airline itself. But, you know, this is I'm afraid the pack, when they decide a story is a story, will just chase it regardless.
His attitude at that point was a weird mix of partly it's all nonsense and lockdowns don't work anyway, and partly, well, this is terrible, but the people who are dying are essentially all over 80, and we can't kill the economy just because of people dying over 80.
It's a very serious claim to make. What evidence do you have of that?
Well, lots of people heard the Prime Minister say that. The Prime Minister texted that to me and other people. You know, when the inquiry happens and everyone has to give evidence under oath, like other things that I've said to you today, you know, this is not just me saying this. Many, many people will say under oath to the public inquiry, if and when that ever happens, that what I've said today, what I told MPs is true.
Do you think Boris Johnson was therefore putting politics ahead of people's lives?
Certainly he did. He put his own political interests ahead of people's lives, for sure.
On the 26th of May, I asked the Prime Minister if he'd ever used the words, "COVID is only killing 80-year-olds, or words to that effect. On that day, the Prime Minister pointedly didn't deny using those words. And now we have the proof that he did. We've all now seen the Prime Minister's text message. I quote, "The median age for COVID fatalities is 82. That is above life expectancy." And we have the Prime Minister's conclusion in the same text. "So get COVID and live longer." Remind the Prime Minister, over 83,000 people aged 80 or over lost their lives to this virus. Everyone leaving behind a grieving family and loved ones. So will the Prime Minister now apologise for using those words?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, nothing I can say from this dispatch box or this virtual dispatch box, I should say, or nothing I can do can make up for the loss and the suffering that people have endured throughout this pandemic. And there will, of course, be a public inquiry into what has happened. But
so, you know, you're wrong and you're a grotesquely ugly freak. Thanks.